Did anybody ever wear Converse All-Stars, Chuck Taylors? Some of you still have them. I still have a pair. When I was a teenager, I was sort of obsessed with Converse All-Stars, and in particular, I was obsessed with one pair that I owned that I wore all the time. Constantly was in the same pair of shoes, no matter what. If I had to dress up and go to church, I was wearing my old beat-up Converse All-Stars. If I was swimming, I would wear them to the beach and wear them in the ocean. Like I never took these things off. They smelled terrible. They were beat up. And I would try to convince people that these were the coolest, most comfortable, most awesome shoes that were ever made. And they weren't. Right? It just wasn't true anymore. They were old. They stunk. They were beat. There was a heel on the left side that would actually flap when I walked. Have you seen Monty Python and the Holy Grail? It sounded like someone was walking behind me clicking coconuts as I walked, like it would just click with me as I moved through. And eventually the heel of the actual insole came off too, and so water and bugs and things would just crawl into the bottom of my shoe. It was a real situation. I also have knee problems with my right knee. I think it's probably got a lot to do with those shoes that I was wearing for so long, trying to tell everybody, no, they're awesome. They're really great. And maybe you have something like that. Maybe you could think back to something that you attributed a tremendous amount of sentimental value to, a pair of shoes or a pair of pants that you really liked, or your lucky underwear that you always wore when the Celtics won, or whatever the thing was for you, or a blanket, or maybe it was a car that you were just committed to. It's got 450,000 miles on it, and you're like, it rides like never before. No, it doesn't though, because I've been in cars like that where people were saying that, and they're like, yeah, I think you might be a little blind to some things. Once it's been a certain mileage, it ain't the same car it was when you bought it, and it's not better than a new one. But I get it. We're kind of like that. We get attached to things, and we attribute value to things and that sort of outlives their actual value. Attributed value from us that outlives actual value. Of course, there's nothing really wrong with adding sentimental value to things. There's nothing wrong with old shoes and old cars and blankets and maybe even memories. There's not even anything wrong with, a little bit of nostalgia here and there. It's thinking back to a camping trip or a family vacation, or maybe a camp you went to in summers that was really fun. Like it was just a good season of a fun thing that we kind of look back into. But what if we weren't talking about old things like that? What if we were talking about old ways of thinking that are destructive? What if we had a discussion about old patterns of thinking, things that we're convinced, and we're trying to convince others, this is a good way, this is the way I've always done it, this is the right way, that are actually damaging us and damaging other people? What if we have habits and ways that we process information, and ways that we interpret things that are just bad ways? They're just old and beat up, and there's no actual value to them, only the value we attribute by continuing to allow them to be a part of our lives. What if we were talking about a habit that's never served you well? Should have kicked it years ago, but just haven't seemed to have been able to let go of it completely yet? What if we were talking about a relationship that should have been over a long, long time ago? Like we shouldn't be responding to those text messages anymore. We shouldn't be Facebook friends anymore. The greatest of all deaths to a relationship, right? You have been blocked from my timeline. You are no longer dead to me. What if we're talking about an old way of thinking, and that's how I process things, that's how I interpret things? What if it's a bad way? What if we maybe need to change some stuff? Now, Jesus speaks to this very idea at the end of Luke chapter 5, and I want us to look there together, and it starts strangely. I already prepared you for that. Are you fully prepared now? Sometimes Jesus says weird stuff that doesn't make sense at first. He's the Son of God, right? He is God in the flesh. He's bound to say some stuff that goes over our head from time to time. And this is one of those things where initially I think it's going to all seem a little strange, but we'll come back around and we'll start to see every time I'm confused and every time I'm a little unclear on what Jesus is saying, if I give it some time and lean into it, I realize he's speaking truth at a greater level than I was ready to accept at first. But there's something really cool that happens in this. Luke chapter 5, verse 33. I'm reading from the New Living Translation. If you're following along on your phone, it's the NLT. We usually go to the NLT here. One day, some people said to Jesus, John the Baptist's disciples fast and pray regularly, and so do the disciples of the Pharisees. Why are your disciples always eating and drinking? To which many of you may respond, wait, following Jesus means just always eating and drinking? I think I have what it takes to follow Jesus, right? This is what he's being addressed with at the start of this. And Jesus responded, well, do wedding guests fast while celebrating with the groom? Of course not. Again, not really a thing that we're familiar with, but he explains that fasting doesn't, what he's saying is fasting and praying in that way doesn't exactly fit in the season that they're in right now. They're with me right now. But someday the groom will be taken away from them, and then they will fast. Someday I won't be standing here with them, I won't be walking with them, and then their spiritual disciplines will need to change. But as of right now, I'm with them all the time. We're camping out all the time. We're spending time together all the time. If they have a question, they just ask me. If I have something I need to teach them, I just teach it to them. They're in a season where this doesn't make a lot of sense. And then he says that at some point, I won't be standing here with them anymore, and then they will fast. So the first thing I want to do, and this is not where your sermon notes are. If you got some sermon notes, we'll get to those in just a few moments. But just to set this up and just to understand the tension of what Jesus is going to speak into here in just a moment, I do want to talk to you a little bit about fasting and why I think this discussion starts at fasting. I've done a couple of extended fasts in my life. Most notably, Megan and I both did a fast together before we moved to Chesterfield County. And during that, there was a 21-day period before we actually moved here where I only consumed liquids. I only drank water and juice. And leading into this fast, it was just something I always wanted to do before I started this church. I wanted to have a season of at least 21 days of fasting and prayer. Just a whole lot of time with Jesus to try to prepare the best of my ability for what lied ahead. And in the months leading up to this, I did a ton of research and planning and scheduling, and I experimented with different juices. And I experimented with different exercise regimens and daily plans and daily schedules, and tried to, essentially what I was trying to do was find a way to live my life normally while fasting, right? Life as usual while fasting, only consuming water and diluted apple juice and bone broth, right? I was trying to, here's the thing. Fasting isn't normal, though. The issue that I came up with at the end of it was like, well, I didn't want to change my exercise regime. I wanted to keep running. I was in a good season of running. I wanted to keep doing it. Well, you can't. You can't. I wanted to keep going out to dinner with my family while we were doing this. Like, I wanted to just hang out with everybody. Like, yeah, well, you can't. You can't do that. I wanted to watch TV like usual. Do you know how many commercials are for pizza? All of them. Pizza and insurance. That's all that's ever advertised anywhere. And this is the thing that I wanted to find a way. I wanted to fast without really changing much. Does that make sense? Is it clear? But the thing is, a fast is an interruption to your regularly scheduled programming. That is what a fast is. A fast is saying, this is normal stuff, this is everyday stuff, this isn't a problem. I'm not talking about sin. I'm not leaving behind, the things that are evil and that are separating me from God and from the best life that he has. And it's just like, it's broccoli. I'm leaving broccoli behind, right? I'm leaving behind good things in order to be in a different season. I'm going to change everything normal for a brief period of time so that everything can change. That's what fasting is. And that's what leads us into the discussion that Jesus starts next. Verse 36. Then he gave them this illustration. No one tears a piece of cloth from a new garment and patches it on an old garment. Does anybody sew in here? Can we confirm this is probably something you wouldn't do, right? You wouldn't tear a piece of new cloth off of a new garment and patch it on an old garment, for then the new garment would be ruined and the new patch wouldn't even match the old garment. In an analogy like this one, I want you to consider, and this is a lot of what we're going to address today, and let's be open to it, okay? Remember, this isn't Drew's idea. Drew's just trying to relate Jesus' idea. Which one appears to be the preferred fabric? Which fabric is the better fabric here? It's the new stuff, right? It's the new fabric. And Jesus is saying, if you've got an old t-shirt and it's got a hole in it, and you got a brand new t-shirt that doesn't have any holes in it, don't tear a hole in the new shirt to try to patch the hole in the old shirt. Take off the old shirt and put the new one on. That's what he's saying in our terms, essentially. So for Jesus, he's just sort of laying this out for us, explaining this to us. But why would he need to explain that? We would all be pretty clear, like new clothes are better than old clothes. We pretty much are. We're cool with that. I don't need that explained to me. Why would he need to explain it? Why is this analogy necessary? Why is this parable necessary? Because we're pretty weird about change. And Jesus wants to help us see that the only way your life can get better is to change your relationship with change. We're pretty weird about it. We're pretty sentimental about a lot of stuff. We're like, but I really like the old shirt. But I really like the old shoes. But I'm really committed to the old way. But I'm so deep into that relationship. Like I've invested so much. But what if it's a bad relationship? Yeah, but I put in so much at this company. Yeah, but what if it's not? You might have to, all he's saying is the new thing and the old thing you can't take a little bit of the new thing and say, I want the new thing, God. Just put it in this old. Doesn't work that way. And then he switches analogies. Doesn't mix the analogies, just switches. And no one puts new wine into old wineskins, right? You know, we use bottles, obviously. If you invite me to your home and you say, Drew, would you like a glass of wine? And I say, sure, I'll take a glass of wine. And you pull a fanny pack out of old, nasty, mushy grape juice, and you pour that in a cup in front of me, I'm going to be offended, I'm going to be appalled, and I'm going to use you as a sermon illustration at some point. I will use this at your expense, right? No one puts new wine into old wineskins. For the new wine would burst the wineskins, spilling the wine and ruining the skins. If you put new wine, apparently, and this is speaking into a culture that we don't drink out of fanny packs anymore. That's not something that but they did. It's kind of like a canteen, a leather canteen thing that they would keep their wine in. And apparently if you put brand new wine into an old wineskin that's been used before, it will burst the old wineskin, the thing that you were trying to protect, the thing that you were trying to keep. You wanted to drink the new stuff out of the old container. It'll ruin that, and you'll lose the new stuff. That's what Jesus is saying. So he uses two illustrations to explain the same concept, and I think he does it really poetically. Are we in agreement on that? I think he does it really well. In a really kind way, Jesus has said this. This would be my way. Jesus is more kind than I am. But he has said, if you want your life to get better, but you don't want to change, you don't know what you want. Right? That's essentially what he's saying. You can't take a new garment and cut it up and patch that onto the old garment, and it'll mess up both. Then you'll have a new shirt with a hole in it and an old shirt with a new patch on it. It's not gonna work. You can't take new wine and put it in your old wineskin container. He's saying essentially this: if you want your life to get better, but you don't want to change, I don't think you know what you want. Verse 38, he continues this second analogy. New wine must be stored in new wineskins, but no one who drinks the old wine seems to want the new. The old is just fine, they say. And that's the end of the chapter. It's pretty anticlimactic, isn't it? It just ends with and the old is just fine, they say. Is there a sadder two words in the English language than just fine? The old is just fine. Many people don't want the new. The old is just fine. You may expect Jesus to say something, I don't know, with more grit to it there. Wouldn't you expect him to say nobody that ever tastes the new stuff ever goes back to the old stuff? That's what I would sort of expect. We're not used to passionate and powerful holy men saying things like, I offer new stuff, And they said, nah, we'd rather have the old stuff. It's the end. It's the end of the chapter, the end of the parables, it's the end of all that. It's a really strange, but why does Jesus say it that way? Because that's what's true. Because the reality is that for a lot of people, that Jesus has come along and said, I've got something new and fresh, but it involves a change. And people would say, oh, if it involves a change, I think I'll just stick with the old stuff. I'll stick with the old fanny pack of the old warm desert wine. Many people never even care to taste the new wine. They're just fine. The old's just fine. You got something new for me, God? The old's just fine. I'm not a sommelier. Is that the right word? Am I saying that right? Someone who knows a lot about wine. I'm not one of those people. But I do want to explain a common misconception that I think we could read into this story, and I think it's going to set us up for the 4 things that are in your sermon notes. And if you want to grab your worship guide, on the back of your worship guide, we have 4 sets of blanks that we're going to fill in, 4 things I want to give you to sort of set us up to truly understand what Jesus might be trying to communicate. And I'll tell you before we even get to them, the first 2 are really just sort of a case for what's being communicated, and the second 2 are why. So the second 2 are a little more serious than the first 2, but we'll get there in just a moment. Before we do that, I want to explain maybe a common misconception about wine. For the most part, people assume that with wine, the older, the better. Right? There's a good reason for this misconception. That in a lot of instances, really fine wines are kept around for a long time. And there's a certain amount of time, actually, that a lot of wines are made in such a way that a certain amount of time transpiring at the right climate and temperature and it being stored in a proper way will actually improve the taste and quality of the wine. And people collect these wines sometimes for years. They may pass them down for generations. And if we are indeed talking about a fine wine, then a certain amount of time will improve the quality of the actual contents. But I'd argue that reading this part of Scripture with that idea, from that place, with that context, is putting our context into theirs. You might be missing a little bit of something that Jesus, I believe, would want his original audience to see. And I'm going to give you 4 reasons why I believe that might be the wrong way to interpret, to think that, well, the old wine is better than new wine, Drew. Old wine is more valuable. It costs more. It's the better stuff. It's the older stuff. I think that might be the wrong way to read it, and here's why. The first of the 4 is this. Old clothing is not better, words, not better in the blanks, than new clothing. Was the first reason I believe that he's teaching this? Well, there's 2 analogies, and in the first one, none of us are really unclear on what's being communicated. Does that make sense? Jesus says in the first one, well, don't mess up new stuff to try to fix old stuff. And we say, yeah, because new clothing's better, right? The new stuff is the better stuff. It's clear that that's what he's communicating here. When you read the first parable with the second, it becomes clearer that Jesus is inviting people to a change. And we're resistant. If you're frustrated with maybe the way that you feel I'm trying to interpret this or trying to inject on this, I would just say perhaps our own resistance to change might be clouding our view to some extent. Jesus, a truly objective reading of what Jesus is saying here, I think puts these two analogies in tandem, communicate essentially. Jesus is saying, well, you should embrace the new thing. The new thing is the better thing. Embrace the new thing that I have for you. Make sense? Second reason that I think that he's trying to communicate that the new wine is better is old wine isn't necessarily, are the 2 blanks, good wine. We make an assumption. Oh yeah, of course they're going to stick with the old stuff. That's fine wine. That's expensive stuff. But if I invited you over to my house to enjoy an 11-year aged bottle of Carl's Grape Garden wine juice with mango melon infusion that I bought on my 21st birthday at a Go-Mart for $2.99, you wouldn't say, that probably wasn't a very good wine 11 years ago, but I bet the years have been good to it, right? Old wine isn't necessarily good wine. We're reading our own context into this whenever we assume that's not a fair assumption to be making. It might be bad to begin with. If it's bad, it's bad. If it's not good stuff, time isn't going to make it better stuff. Just because it's old doesn't mean it's good, believe it or not. Some people are so afraid of change that they stick with the old stuff over the new stuff. That's essentially what I think Jesus is saying here. Are there some things in your life that you continue to do a certain way because that's how you've always done it? Ways that you think, and it's like, I think that way because it's how I am. It's how I'm wired. I'm wired to think that way, right? I'm a worrier. It's what I do, right? I'm sort of angry. I got sort of a short fuse. It's just who I am. Well, what if it's a bad way? Just because that's the way you've always done it doesn't make it a good way. There was you've probably heard this story before. It's a bit of a modern day parable, but there was a woman who was cooking a ham, and before she put her ham into the oven to bake it, she cut 3 inches off of the left side of the ham and 3 inches off the right side of the ham, and then put it in. And somebody came and they asked her, it was like, what are you wasting like 6 inches of ham? Like you're losing 6 inches of ham every time you make a ham. And she said, oh yeah, that's just how my mom did it. She called up her mom and said, Mom, I never asked, why do we cut off 3 inches on the left side of the ham and 3 inches on the right side of the ham? And Mom said, I don't know, it's how my mom always did it. So she called her mom. Her grandmother, the original woman's grandmother, is still alive, so we called Grandma. Grandma, why did you always cut off 3 inches? Why do we do that? Somebody just asked me, and I never really bothered to ask why. And Grandma said, oh, I did it because I had an old oven that wasn't big enough for a full ham. And we're a little bit like this sometimes about old ways, aren't we? Like, what if it's just a bad way? What, are you just doing it that way because you've always done it that way? That's not a good reason. Makes sense? Are we just thinking that way because I've always thought that way? You just treat people that way because that's how I've always treated people? I just consider my relationship with God sort of in the same box it's always been. Well, what if it's the wrong box? What if we're thinking an old way and it's not a good way? Old wine isn't necessarily good wine. And then here's the third. And I believe this is where this gets a little more serious, because I think this starts to speak into maybe why. Why would Jesus speak all of this? Why does he want us to see this so clearly? In his love and affection towards us, and in his care for us, and his kindness towards us. Why is this so important to him? Well, the third reason that I think that he's communicating new wine is better is old wine is limited. The blank on your sermon notes for number 3 is the word limited. Eventually, old wine runs out. Guess what? We can't make any more wine in 1988. Right? If that was a good year for wine, great. You can't have any more. Once it's gone, it's gone. It's limited. Make sense? Limited. There's a certain limitation to the idea that the best stuff is the old stuff. We get sucked into thinking that the best times that we've ever had in our lives were old times. Right? It kind of happens as like my best days were my high school days, my college days, my 20s, my 30s, my 40s, my 50s, whatever. There was a decade of life, that was the best one. It's a trap, isn't it? There's a trap we get to thinking that our best relationships, the best friendships are the ones that really aren't in our lives anymore. And yeah, I had good friends back then. Those were the days when I was surrounded by those kinds of people. It's an old wine sort of concept, isn't it? It's a limitation concept. It's like the best stuff is the old stuff that I can't have anymore. The best stuff is the stuff that's over. I think this is one of the most effective ways that the enemy keeps us from experiencing joy in our lives. He wants you to believe that your best days are behind you. And so one of the reasons that I think Jesus, in all of his kindness and love, comes along and says, some people just want, they say the old is just fine, but I'm offering new. One of the reasons is because the old is limited. Jesus sees that. He's like, at some point, you got to embrace the idea. You need to be open to the idea that new seasons and a change, and like this could be a good thing. I got good stuff in front of you too. The best stuff isn't just the old stuff. It's not the stuff that's over now. That in fact, with God, and this is only true, this is exclusively true for people who really trust Jesus for salvation. We're the only people really on the planet that get to say tomorrow is better than yesterday. We're the only people who get to embrace the idea that our best days are ahead of us. that the best is yet to come. Nobody else really gets to embrace that. Like, nobody else gets to say, the older I get, the better everything gets. It's not exactly true unless your hope is in something eternal. And so one of the things that Jesus invites us to is that this new is good. I got the change is good. Old, it's over. You can't have it back. And so stop living convinced. I think Jesus is teaching us. Stop living convinced that the best stuff already happened. The glory days aren't behind you. I really think our best days are yet to come with God. Are there areas of your life where you sort of long for old ways, old habits, old friendships, good old days, however, stuff that you just simply can't have anymore? Man, I'd be happier if I was back there. And maybe Jesus is speaking this into your life today as a way of saying, no, the old stuff isn't the better stuff. I got new stuff right now. You can't have that anymore. That stuff is over, and I got a new season. And doesn't mean it was bad. It doesn't mean it just means it's over and we can't have it back. And so I've got something new for you now. And I hope that that's received I hope you can see the compassion in this. I hope you can see what it is that Jesus is trying to speak to combat against the things that the enemy tries to convince us of. Because a lot of us, we've lost people that we love. Right? We've gone through seasons of incredible disappointment. Some of us are in a place right now where you're like, Drew, this can't possibly be the best decade of my life because they're not here anymore. This can't possibly be the best. The old stuff, I think it was better because there were people around then that aren't here anymore. And I'm just saying, I think there's more to it. I think God is inviting us to embrace something that's so contrary to what we would come out on our own. That's why it all goes over our head initially. That's why he speaks in these parables, because this truth is so hard to truly accept in some situations. Does that make sense? Hopefully that's clear. I believe that the old wine is limited, and one of the reasons Jesus wants us to see, I got new stuff for you, is the best days don't have to be behind you. They can be ahead. And the fourth reason, and this fourth reason why I believe he's trying to communicate the new wine is better, really is what this entire series hinges on. I'm going to end the talk here. I'm ending the series here. I think it's the idea it all boils down to. Jesus is offering the new wine. Why is the new wine better? Well, because it's from Jesus. He's the one holding the new wine and saying they want the old stuff they've got in their hands, and I got new stuff for you. If Jesus were standing in front of you today, he's holding a fanny pack. Hipsters rejoice, right? Jesus carries a fanny pack. He's holding a fanny pack, and it's dripping with this old, nasty, chunky desert wine. And he's like, this is your stuff. This is stuff you've been drinking all these years. This is stuff you're convinced is the best stuff. And you say it's just fine. And he's holding in the other hand something brand new. A new wine, if you will. And he says, I made this for you. I've got this. This is something really special just for you. I had you in mind when I made this. I know you better than you know you. And I know you like the old stuff. There's nothing wrong with the old stuff. I know you're a little sentimental about some of your old ways. I know you get a little attached to your old habits and old ways of thinking and all that. But I think you're really going to like what I've made for you here. If Jesus presented you with that image, that analogy, what's your response today? And what do you do with your response? Right? What do we do if we say, well, Drew, obviously you're trying to lead us to want the new fanny pack. right? Obviously, you want us to choose the new stuff. I'll go with, what do you do moving forward? If you guys want to come, I'm going to close here. We'll wrap up this idea. What do you do if Jesus is standing and he's saying, I know you like the old stuff, but it's nothing like the new stuff I've got for you. I know you like the old stuff, but the new stuff, it won't ever run out. I want to make your life better, but in order to do that, you got to be open to some change. You got to be open to some new things. Here's what I think might be necessary, might be helpful, and I'm going to give you sort of two ideas here. One, at a very practical level, at a very surface level, I think any one of us could walk out of here with the image of these two bags of wine, the image maybe of your Savior standing and saying, you're so committed to an old way that isn't working, a habit that's never served you well, a way of processing information that's never been healthy, a relationship that was never a good relationship, a text that you can't ever seem to not respond to. And in the other hand, he's saying, I got something new. And maybe, so number one, maybe every one of us needs to walk out with that image burned in our heads. And when that old way comes up, when you experience a bit of potentially negative information and you decide to dwell on it and worry about it, that you would say, this is old, chunky, desert bag wine, and I'm drinking this stuff up. Why? Why am I going? This is not good wine. This is not a good way to think. This is not a good way to process. This has never served me well. I've never worried, fretted, obsessed about things in a negative way, and then looked back later and said, ooh, glad I did that. Glad I worried in the way that I did. I'm not saying we don't live cautiously. I'm not saying we don't, get stuff checked out if it needs checked out, right? I'm not suggesting, I'm just saying none of us have ever looked back. Why are we drinking that old wine? The next time that you get sort of frustrated or anger starts to well up and you're like, I think it's time to start swinging verbally or physically or whatever, that you would say, this isn't old wine. Why am I drinking this nasty, chunky, warm desert wine that's never served me well when Jesus has invited me to something new? Why don't I just try the new stuff this time? Make sense? At a very practical surface level. Maybe that's it. Maybe you just need the image burned in your head. You just need the metaphor, the parable just stuck in there. Just, what are the old wines, and they're nasty, and they're not helping, and it's never served me well, and I'm just not going back. And then at a deeper level, maybe for some of you, this entire series, 6 weeks, maybe even just today, maybe you've only been with us today, and you would say this, I think we might be onto something here. But we're not talking about a little, like minor course correction adjustment I need to make in my life. We're talking about a 180-degree turn. If you would say, Drew, that's fine and good, and the practical stuff, I can see how that could be helpful for a lot of people. But for me, I need a bigger change than that. I need some stuff to, I'm way off of the right path. And correcting my course just a little bit is likely to get me just a little more lost than I already am. I think I need to turn around and go back to where the path was to begin with. Does that make sense? And if that's you, and this is going to sound a little strange at first, but remember, this is where this all started. I think you might actually need to consider a fast. I think you might actually be in a position, if you would say, this is a major, major season of change in my life. Like stuff is either not going well, or I'm right on the cusp of things going really well and I don't want to screw it up, or I'm about to see some major changes in my life, like what the last 6 months look like and what the next 6 months look like are going to be totally different things. Maybe it would be good for you to consider a fast, for you to take a couple of days, maybe a couple of weeks. I think there is reason to consider 21 days. There's a lot of biblical reasons for that, and then even just neuroplastic reasons for that. It takes about 21 days to form a new pattern of thinking in your own mind, a new way of thinking, and that's a good season of time, I think, for you to say, I think I might actually need to take a little season and change some stuff majorly temporarily so that I can course correct for what lies ahead? And if that is you, if you've got any questions about it, I'd love to talk to you about it. But I felt like we needed to land there today. I feel like there's a minor adjustment for every single one of us to make. But then I think there are some of us who would say, and it might not be bad. It might be good. You understand that, right? You might be on the verge of a really cool season of life. You might be on the verge of some of the best stuff you've ever experienced. Some of the stuff that you've been waiting for all your life might be about to happen. And maybe that's a good reason to say, I'm going to take a few days. Change a few things internally. Change a few old ways of thinking. I'm going to get rid of some old nasty bags of wine. And I need to do something major in order for that to happen. Would you bow your heads and close your eyes just right where you are? I want you to